Some people say that the eyes are windows to the soul, but I learned the hard way that some windows have curtains drawn tight, hiding the darkness within. My name is Eleanor Lewis, and at 65 years old, I thought I knew people well enough to spot trouble when it walked through my front door. I was wrong, dead wrong, and that mistake nearly cost me everything, including the son I raised to be better than the man he became that terrible Sunday evening. You see, when your child brings home someone who seems too good to be true, there's usually a reason for that. But love makes fools of us all, doesn't it? Even those of us who should know better. What I'm about to tell you isn't just a story about family betrayal or the length some people will go to for control. It's about something much deeper, something that cuts to the very heart of what it means to trust, to protect what's yours, and to find strength when everything you believed in crumbles beneath your feet. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The woman who nearly destroyed my family didn't just manipulate my son Marcus into striking me that rainy October evening. She pushed our entire world off balance, sending us tumbling into a nightmare that would test every bond we thought was unbreakable. But here's what she didn't count on. Sometimes the people you underestimate are the ones who surprise you the most. My house on Maple Street has been in the Lewis family for 3 generations. It's nothing fancy, a modest 2-story Victorian, with a wraparound porch that needs painting and gardens that bloom wild with whatever I plant each spring. But it's mine, bought and paid for with the salary I earned as an elementary school principal for 37 years. After my husband Robert passed 5 years ago, this house became my sanctuary, my fortress of memories and quiet Sunday mornings. Marcus was my only child, born when I was 28 and already convinced I'd never be a mother. He was a miracle baby in every sense. Colicky, demanding, but absolutely perfect in my eyes. I raised him to be respectful, hardworking, and honest. Maybe I spoiled him a little after Robert died, but Marcus had always been a good son. He called twice a week, helped with yard work, and brought his daughter Emma over every other weekend after his divorce 3 years ago. We had our rhythm, our traditions, our unspoken understanding that family came first. Then, Kara entered our lives like a spring storm, beautiful, refreshing, and deceptively dangerous. She was 32 to Marcus's 37, with honey blonde, hair that always fell perfectly around her shoulders, and green eyes that could shift from warm to calculating in a heartbeat. She claimed to work in marketing for a hotel chain downtown, though I never quite understood what that meant when she described her job in vague, glossy terms. She'd grown up in Atlanta, she said, but had moved to our small town of Millbrook for a simpler life after a bad breakup. I just want peace, she told me the first time Marcus brought her for Sunday dinner, her manicured hand resting on his forearm. I want to build something real with someone who values family the way I do. I wanted to like her. Lord knows I tried. After Marcus's bitter divorce from Emma's mother, a woman who'd moved to Florida with her new husband and barely called Emma anymore, I was desperate for him to find happiness again. Kara seemed to adore him, always touching his arm, laughing at his jokes, telling him how wonderful he was. She was attentive to Emma, bringing her little gifts and asking about school with what appeared to be genuine interest. But there were moments, tiny fractures in her perfect facade, that made something deep in my gut twist with unease. The first time I noticed it was during that initial Sunday dinner. Emma had spilled grape juice on her dress, and before I could even reach for a napkin, Kara had Emma by the wrist, her voice sharp despite the smile on her face. "Careful, sweetheart. We don't want to make more messes for Grandma Eleanor to clean up, do we?" The grip on Emma's wrist was too tight, the words too pointed. Emma's face flushed with embarrassment, and she barely spoke for the rest of the meal. When I tried to reassure her that accidents happen, Kara laughed it off. "Oh, Eleanor, you're too sweet. But children need to learn consequences, don't they? Structure is so important." Marcus nodded along, already adapting to this new dynamic where Kara's voice carried weight in decisions about his own daughter. The second red flag came a month later, when Kara started showing up to family gatherings with suggestions that sounded more like subtle commands. The green bean casserole I always made for Thanksgiving? Marcus mentioned you might want to try something new this year. I found this amazing recipe with almonds and cranberries. The Christmas traditions Emma and I had built together? Wouldn't it be lovely to start some new traditions now that our family is growing? Our family. She'd been dating Marcus for 3 months, but it was the way she handled money that really set my teeth on edge. During that first October dinner, the one that changed everything, Kara had mentioned casually that she'd helped Marcus reorganize his finances. He was so disorganized before, she said with a laugh that sounded like music but felt like nails on a chalkboard. Separate accounts for everything, no real planning. I've got him all straightened out now. I'd been setting the table when she said it, and I paused with the serving spoon halfway to the mashed potatoes. Oh, that's nice that you're helping him get organized. Well, it just makes sense to consolidate when you're building a life together, Kara continued, her voice taking on that patient tone people use when explaining something to a child. Joint accounts, shared responsibilities, we're a team now. Marcus beamed at her like she'd just solved world hunger. She's amazing with numbers, Mom. She's already found ways to save money I didn't even know we were wasting. They'd been together 4 months, and suddenly everything was we. That's wonderful, I said carefully, trying to keep my voice neutral. I imagine it's helpful to have someone looking out for you, though I hope you're still maintaining some independence, Marcus. Your father always said it was important for both people in a relationship to have their own. Eleanor? Kara interrupted gently, but there was steel beneath the silk. I think that's lovely advice for your generation, but things are different now. When people truly trust each other, they don't need to keep secrets or separate resources. It's about partnership. The implication hung in the air like smoke, that I was old-fashioned, out of touch, and somehow promoting dishonesty in relationships. Marcus shifted uncomfortably but didn't defend me or his father's memory. I just meant, I began. Mom? Kara knows what she's talking about, Marcus said, his voice carrying a warning I'd never heard before. She's helped us get on track financially, in ways I never could have managed alone. Us. Now it was us. Emma had been unusually quiet throughout this exchange, picking at her food with her head down. When I asked her about school, Kara answered for her. She's doing much better now that we've established some structure at home. Regular bedtimes, limited screen time, consistent expectations. Children thrive with boundaries. I looked at Emma, my heart aching at how small she looked in her chair. Is that right, sweetheart? Are you liking your new routine? Before Emma could answer, Kara placed a protective hand on the girl's shoulder. She's adjusting beautifully. Sometimes change is hard, but it's always worth it in the end. Isn't that right, Emma? Emma nodded, but her eyes stayed fixed on her plate. The rest of the dinner passed with strained small talk about the weather and local news. Kara dominated the conversation, steering it away from any topic that might invite deeper questions about their relationship or her background. When I asked about her family, she gave vague answers about her parents being very private people who lived quietly in Atlanta. When I mentioned that I'd love to meet them, someday she smiled that perfect smile and said, "Oh, they're not really the social type, very set in their ways." After dinner, as I was clearing the table, I overheard Kara talking to Marcus in low tones on the front porch. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the kitchen window was open and voices carry. "She's lovely, really," Kara was saying, "but I can see where you get your habit of trying to please everyone. It's sweet, but it's not always healthy. You can't let people, even family, make you feel guilty for living your own life." "She doesn't mean anything by it," Marcus replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "Of course not. She loves you. But love can be suffocating sometimes, can't it? The constant questions, the subtle suggestions about how we should handle our relationship, our finances, even how we parent Emma. It's a lot of pressure. My hands stilled on the plates I was washing. I'd asked one gentle question about financial independence, and somehow that had become constant questions and pressure. Maybe we should talk to her, Marcus said uncertainly. Oh, honey, no. That would just hurt her feelings and make things awkward. We'll just have to be gentle but firm about boundaries. She'll understand eventually. When they came back inside, Kara hugged me warmly and thanked me for the lovely meal. Marcus was quieter than usual, distracted. As they gathered their things to leave, I knelt down to hug Emma goodbye. I love you, sweetheart, I whispered into her hair. I love you, too, Grandma Eleanor, she whispered back, clinging to me a little longer than usual. As I watched them walk to Marcus's car, I noticed Kara's hand resting possessively on his lower back, guiding him forward while she spoke animatedly about something that made him nod along. Emma trailed behind them, her small hands clutching. A stuffed animal she'd brought from home, a security blanket she'd never needed before. That night, I sat on my front porch with a cup of tea, trying to shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in my world. The October air was crisp, carrying the scent of burning leaves and the promise of winter. I'd always loved this time of year, the turning of seasons, the preparation for holidays, the cozy drawing inward that came with shorter days. But tonight, I felt exposed, vulnerable in a way I hadn't experienced since Robert's death. It wasn't just what Kara had said or the way she'd said it. It was the look in Marcus's eyes when he'd warned me off asking questions. It was the way Emma had shrunk into herself. It was the subtle but unmistakable message that my role in my son's life was being redefined by someone who'd known him for 4 months. I thought about calling my neighbor Tanya, who'd been my friend for 20 years and had no filter when it came to speaking her mind. But what would I say? That I didn't like my son's girlfriend because she was too helpful? Too organized? Too confident in her opinions about family dynamics? Instead, I sat in the growing darkness, listening to the crickets and trying to talk myself out of the dread that had settled in my chest like a stone. Marcus was happy. Emma would adjust. Kara was probably just enthusiastic about being party of a family after whatever painful breakup had brought her to Millbrook. I was being oversensitive, protective in the way that mothers sometimes are when their adult children find love. But as I finally went inside and locked the door behind me, I couldn't shake the memory of Kara's eyes when she'd corrected Emma about the spilled juice. For just a moment, the mask had slipped, and I'd seen something cold and calculating underneath all that warmth. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself I was being unfair. I told myself that love makes people do strange things, say things they don't mean, change in ways that aren't always comfortable for the people who love them. I was wrong about all of it. The phone calls came first, or rather, they stopped coming. Marcus had always called me on Tuesday evenings and Friday afternoons, just to check in, share stories about work, or ask my advice about Emma's school projects. It was our rhythm, as reliable as sunrise. But after that October dinner, the calls became sporadic, then brief, then non-existent. When I finally broke down and called him, Kara always seemed to be in the background, her voice a constant murmur of reminders and suggestions. "Tell your mom about the promotion possibility," she'd say loud enough for me to hear. "Don't forget we have that dinner with my colleagues tomorrow." Always something to cut our conversation short. Always some prior commitment that took precedence over a simple chat with his mother. "I should probably go, Mom," Marcus would say apologetically. "Kara's made dinner reservations, and you know how these places are about timing." I didn't know, actually. Robert and I had rarely eaten anywhere fancier than the Cracker Barrel, and we'd never worried about timing. But I murmured understanding and told him to have a good time, swallowing the hurt that seemed to grow larger with each abbreviated conversation. The visit stopped next. Our standing Sunday dinners became, "We'll have to see how the weekend shapes up," and "Kara's got us pretty booked this month." When I suggested I could make dinner on a different day, or that I could come to their place, instead, there was always a reason why that wouldn't work. "The house is a disaster right now," Marcus would say. "Kara's redecorating Emma's room, and there's paint and fabric samples everywhere. Maybe next month when things settle down." But next month brought new excuses: holiday shopping, work deadlines. Kara's family visiting from Atlanta, though I never saw any evidence of these visits, never met any of these mysterious relatives who supposedly kept them so busy. By December, I was seeing Emma maybe once every 3 weeks, and the change in she saw her was heartbreaking. My chatty, affectionate granddaughter had become quiet and subdued, answering questions with single words and avoiding eye contact. She'd always been a hugger, running to me with arms outstretched the moment she walked through my door. Now she stood beside Marcus stiffly, waiting for permission to move, to speak, to simply be herself. "Say hello to Grandma Eleanor, Kara," would prompt in that sickeningly sweet voice, and Emma would dutifully hug me with arms that felt limp and uncertain. The gifts started around this time, expensive presents that seemed designed to make me feel inadequate. When I gave Emma a set of watercolor paints and a sketchbook for Christmas, Kara presented her with a professional-grade art easel and oil paints, for when she's ready to take her talent seriously. "Oh, Eleanor, watercolors are such a lovely beginner gift," Kara said with that practiced smile. But Emma's showing real promise. We don't want to limit her potential with amateur supplies. When I knitted Marcus a scarf in his favorite blue, a tradition I'd maintained since he was in high school, Kara gave him a cashmere coat that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "Mom, you didn't need to do that," Marcus said, uncomfortably fingering the soft wool of my handmade scarf. "Of course she did," Kara interjected smoothly. "Grandmothers love to spoil their boys. But now you've got options for every occasion. Handmade for casual, and something elegant for when we go out somewhere special." The message was clear. My gifts were fine for around the house, but not suitable for the life they were building. Together. A life that apparently required a level of sophistication I couldn't provide. It was Tanya who finally put words to what I was feeling. She'd watched me grow increasingly withdrawn and anxious over the winter months, seen me standing at my front window watching for Marcus's car like a lovesick teenager waiting for a date. "Eleanor," she said one cold February morning as we sat in my kitchen sharing coffee and homemade biscuits, "you're being frozen out, one sweet word at a time." Tanya Morales had been my neighbor for 20 years, and her directness was both a blessing and a curse. She said what others only thought, called things by their real names, and had zero tolerance for manipulation in any form. As a retired nurse, she'd seen every variety of human behavior, and very little surprised her anymore. "I don't know what you mean," I said, though we both knew I was lying. "The hell you don't." Tanya stirred sugar into her coffee with more force than necessary. "That girl is cutting you out of your son's life so gradually that he doesn't even realize it's happening. It's textbook manipulation, Eleanor. I've seen it in families dealing with addiction, abusive relationships, financial scams. The isolation always comes first." "Marcus is happy," I protested weakly. "Marcus is being managed," Tanya corrected. "There's a difference. When's the last time he made a decision without checking with her first? When's the last time he called you just to talk, without her voice in the background directing the conversation?" I couldn't answer because I couldn't remember. "And that poor child," Tanya continued, her voice softening with concern. "Emma's walking on eggshells in her own father's house. Did you see how she flinched when she accidentally knocked over that water glass last week? Like she expected to be punished for a simple accident." I had seen it, and my heart had broken a little more. Emma had always been a confident, outgoing child, secure in the knowledge that she was loved unconditionally. But lately, she seemed to be constantly monitoring the adults around her, gauging moods and adjusting her behavior accordingly. "Maybe I should talk to Marcus," I said, uncertainly. Tanya gave me a look that could have curdled milk. "And say what? That you don't like his girlfriend? That you think she's isolating him from his family?" "He's not going to hear that, Eleanor. Right now, he's getting praise and attention and probably the best sex of his life. You think he's going to choose his worried mother over the woman who makes him feel like a king?" Her bluntness made me wince, but I knew she was right. Marcus was completely under Kara's spell, and any criticism of her would be seen as jealousy or interference. "So what do I do?" I asked, feeling helpless and old in a way I hadn't since Robert's funeral. "You document everything," Tanya said firmly. "Every conversation, every excuse, every time that child shows up here looking like she's been walking through a minefield. You watch, you listen, and you wait for her to show her true colors." "Because she will, Eleanor. People like that always do. They can't help themselves." "People like what?" "Predators," Tanya said simply. "I don't know what she's after, money, security, control, or just the thrill of breaking up a happy family. But I know her type, and I know she's not done with you yet. Right now, she's content to keep you at a distance while she consolidates her hold on Marcus. But eventually, you're going to become more than just an inconvenience. You're going to become a threat." "A threat to what?" "To whatever endgame she's got planned." That conversation haunted me for weeks. I found myself analyzing every interaction with Kara, looking for the manipulation Tanya had identified. It wasn't hard to find once I knew what to look for. The way she spoke for Marcus in conversations, making statements about what we think and what we've decided. The way she redirected any attempt to spend time alone with Emma. The subtle but constant criticism of my parenting choices, disguised as helpful suggestions about Emma's development and structure. Most disturbing was the way she'd begun to rewrite history, creating a narrative where Marcus had been struggling before she came along, and she'd rescued him from chaos and confusion. "He was so overwhelmed when we met," she told me during one of their increasingly rare visits. "The divorce really shattered his confidence, and he was making some questionable decisions about Emma's upbringing. No structure, no consistency. It's amazing what a difference the right kind of support can make." Marcus nodded along to this revision of his life, apparently forgetting that he'd been doing just fine as a single father before Kara arrived. He'd been involved in Emma's school, maintained a stable home, and built a successful career in real estate. But somehow, in Kara's version, he'd been a mess that only she could fix. The final straw came in March, when I decided to surprise them with a visit. I'd made Marcus's favorite soup, the same chicken and dumplings I'd been making since he was Emma's age, and drove to their house unannounced, hoping to recapture some of the spontaneous warmth our family had once shared. Kara answered the door in yoga pants and a fitted top, looking effortlessly beautiful even in casual clothes. Her smile was polite but cool, and she didn't invite me in. "Oh, Eleanor, what a surprise. I wish you'd called first. We're just about to head out to run errands." I could see Marcus in the background, still in his pajamas at 2 p.m. on a Saturday. Emma was nowhere to be seen. "I brought soup," I said, holding up the covered pot. "I thought maybe we could have an early dinner together." "That's so thoughtful," Kara said, not reaching for the pot. "But we've already got plans for dinner. Maybe next time you could call ahead? We're trying to teach Emma about schedules and keeping commitments." The implication was clear. My unplanned visit was disrupting Emma's education and responsibility. I was being a bad influence simply by showing up at my son's house with homemade food. "I could just say hello to Emma," I suggested, my voice smaller than I intended. "She's napping," Kara said firmly. "The poor thing had a rough night. Bad dreams, and she really needs her rest. I'm sure you understand." I didn't understand. Emma had outgrown naps years ago, and she'd never been prone to nightmares. But I found myself nodding anyway, accepting this explanation like a chastened child. "Maybe I could just leave the soup? For later," I offered. "Oh, that's sweet, but we're actually trying to eat lighter these days. Marcus has been working so hard to get in shape, and Emma's learning about nutrition. I wouldn't want to derail their progress." My chicken and dumpling soup, made with love and eaten at our family table for 37 years, had become a dietary obstacle to be avoided. I drove home with the pot still warm in my passenger seat, feeling more alone than I had since Robert died. That evening, I called Marcus's cell phone directly. "Mom?" He sounded surprised to hear from me. "Is everything okay?" "I stopped by earlier with soup," I said carefully. "Kara said you were heading out." There was a pause, and I heard muffled conversation in the background. "Yeah, we had errands to run," he said finally. "You should have called first. We might have been able to adjust our schedule." Might have. When had seeing his mother become something that required scheduling adjustments? "How's Emma?" I asked. "She's fine. Just tired today. You know how kids are." I didn't know, actually, because I hardly saw her anymore. But I didn't say that. "Marcus," I began, then stopped. What could I say that wouldn't sound like criticism or interference? That I missed him? That I was worried about the changes I saw in Emma? That his girlfriend made me feel unwelcome in my own son's life? "Yeah, Mom, I love you," I said simply. "I love you too," he replied. But his voice was distant, distracted. "I should probably go. Kara's waiting for me." Always waiting. Always needing. Always more important than a 5-minute conversation with the woman who'd raised him. After I hung up, I sat in my quiet house and tried to remember the last time Marcus and I had laughed together, really laughed, the way we used to when he'd tell me stories about his work or Emma's latest adventures. I couldn't. Every interaction now felt strained, performative, like we were both reading from scripts written by someone else. That night, I took Tanya's advice and started a journal. I wrote down every conversation, every excuse, every time Emma looked afraid or Marcus seemed distant. I documented the gradual erosion of relationships that had once been the foundation of my world. I didn't know then that I was creating evidence for a case I'd eventually have to make. I just knew that something precious was slipping away from me, and I needed to remember what it had looked like before it was gone entirely. Spring came early that year, and with it, a sense of urgency I couldn't quite explain. The daffodils in my garden bloomed ahead of schedule, and the air carried a restless energy that made me feel like I was waiting for something, though I couldn't say what. I was about to find out. The call came on a Thursday morning in late April, shrill and demanding in the quiet of my kitchen where I was having my morning coffee and reading the newspaper. I almost didn't answer. It was barely 8 o'clock, and Marcus usually waited until evening to call, if he called at all anymore. "Mom?" His voice was tight with anxiety. "I need a favor." My heart immediately started racing the way it does when you sense crisis approaching. "What's wrong?" "Kara's got a work emergency. Some client dinner she has to organize at the last minute. I'm supposed to be showing a house this afternoon, but Emma's school called. She's running a fever and needs to be picked up. Could you?" "Of course," I said before he could finish. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. "You're a lifesaver, Mom. I'll call the school and let them know you're coming." For the first time in months, I felt useful, needed. I threw on clothes and drove to Emma's elementary school with something approaching joy. Finally, a chance to take care of my granddaughter without Kara's supervision, without the constant undercurrent of judgment about my methods or motivations. Emma was waiting in the nurse's office, looking small and pale in her school uniform. When she saw me, her face lit up with genuine happiness for the first time in weeks. "Grandma Eleanor!" She ran to me without hesitation, wrapping her thin arms around my waist. "Oh, sweetheart," I murmured, pressing my hand to her forehead. She was warm, but not burning up. Probably just a mild bug that would pass with rest, and some grandmother prescribed comfort food. "Let's get you home and tucked into bed." "Can I go to your house?" she asked hopefully. "Please? I don't want to go to Dad's house." The nurse looked at me questioningly, and I made a quick decision. "Of course, honey. We'll call your dad and let him know." Marcus was relieved when I told him I'd keep Emma at my house for the afternoon. "That's perfect, Mom. Kara's stressed. Enough about this work thing without having to worry about a sick kid, too." A sick kid. That's how he referred to his daughter now. Not Emma with a fever who needed comfort, but a sick kid who would be an inconvenience to Kara's work emergency. I settled Emma on my living room couch with her favorite blanket, the one I'd crocheted for her 3rd birthday, which apparently didn't match the new decor at her father's house, but lived permanently at mine now. I made her chamomile tea with honey and turned on old Disney movies, the kind Kara considered too stimulating for children who needed educational content. For 3 hours, Emma was herself again. She laughed at the funny parts of The Little Mermaid, sang along to songs she knew by heart, and chattered about school and her friends and her art projects. The tension I'd grown accustomed to seeing in her small shoulders melted away, and I remembered the confident, joyful child she'd been before Kara entered their lives. "Grandma Eleanor," she said during a quiet moment between movies, "why doesn't Kara like me?" The question hit me like a physical blow. "Oh, sweetheart, what makes you think that?" Emma's fingers worried the edge of her blanket. "She's always telling me what I'm doing wrong. How I eat, how I sit, how loud I talk. She says I need to be more mature, more responsible. But I try really hard, and she still seems mad at me." My heart broke for this 8-year-old child who was trying to figure out why the woman in her father's life found her presence so problematic. "Emma, honey, you are perfect exactly as you are. You're kind and smart and funny, and anyone who can't see that is missing out on knowing a very special little girl." "But Dad always agrees with her," Emma said quietly. "When she says I need to do better, he nods and tells me to listen to Kara. It's like he thinks she's right, and I really am too loud and messy and—" Her voice trailed off. I pulled her closer, fighting back tears of rage. This was what Kara had done to my family, made a confident child doubt herself, made a loving father question his own daughter's worth through someone else's critical eyes. "Your daddy loves you more than anything in the world," I said carefully. "Sometimes adults get confused about what's best, but that doesn't change how much he loves you." "I wish things could go back to how they were before," Emma whispered. "When it was just me and Dad, and we'd come here for dinner every Sunday, and nobody was mad all the time." Before I could respond, I heard Marcus's key in my front door. He'd had a key since he was 16, but he rarely used it anymore. Kara had made it clear that barging in on people was rude, and Marcus had apparently internalized that my home was no longer a place he could enter freely. "Mom?" he called. "Out." "How's our patient?" Emma immediately tensed beside me, and I felt the shift in the air as she prepared to be someone else's version of acceptable. "We're in here," I called back. "She's feeling much better." Marcus appeared in the doorway, still in his work clothes. A crisp button-down shirt and dress pants that Kara had chosen to elevate his professional image. Behind him, like a shadow, came Kara herself. I wasn't expecting her, and my surprise must have shown on my face. "I finished the client dinner planning early," she said with that perfect smile. "I thought I'd come check on our little patient, too." Our little patient? Not Emma. Not even Marcus's daughter, but our patient, as if she had some claim to this child's care and well-being. "I'm feeling better," Emma said quietly, automatically sitting up straighter and folding her hands in her lap the way Kara had. Taught her was proper. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Kara said in her honey-sweet voice. "But you know, if you were really sick, You should probably be resting in bed, not watching television. Screen time isn't good for recovery. The criticism was gentle but unmistakable. I'd been caring for sick children for 37 years as a teacher and mother, but apparently I didn't understand the basics of helping a child recover from a minor fever. She's been resting, I said evenly. A little gentle entertainment can be comforting when you're not feeling well. Oh, I'm sure you meant well, Kara said dismissively. But there's actual research about how screen time affects the immune system. I can send you some articles if you're interested. The condescension was breathtaking. This woman, who had no children of her own and had known Emma for less than a year, was correcting my childcare methods based on research she'd probably Googled that morning. Emma seemed to be enjoying herself, I said carefully. Sometimes, comfort is just as important as following rules. Comfort is important, Kara agreed with a patronizing nod. But so is consistency. If we make exceptions every time someone gets a little sniffle, children learn to manipulate situations to get what they want. Emma's old enough to understand that being sick doesn't mean the rules disappear. Marcus was nodding along, and I watched my granddaughter shrink further into herself as her mild fever was reframed as manipulation and her grandmother's care was dismissed as enabling bad behavior. She's 8 years old with a fever, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. She's not manipulating anyone. She's a child who doesn't feel well and wanted some comfort. Of course, Kara said smoothly. And it's natural for grandparents to want to spoil their grandchildren. But Marcus and I are trying to raise Emma with consistent expectations and boundaries. We can't have her learning that different rules apply in different places, can we, Marcus? Mom, Kara's got a point, Marcus said reluctantly. Consistency is important for kids. I stared at my son, the boy I'd raised to think for himself, to trust his instincts, to stand up for what was right. That boy was gone, replaced by a man who parroted his girlfriend's opinions about his own daughter as if they were gospel truth. I've been taking care of children for 40 years, I said quietly. I think I know the difference between spoiling and comforting. Of course you do, Kara said in that infuriatingly patient tone. But parenting philosophies evolve, don't they? What worked for your generation might not be the best approach for Emma's development now. We're just trying to give her the tools she needs to be successful in today's world. Today's world, apparently, was one where 8-year-olds with fevers needed to be taught lessons about consistency rather than given soup and cartoons. Emma, I said, turning to my granddaughter, how do you feel? Are you ready to go home, or would you like to rest here a little longer? Before Emma could answer, Kara stepped in. We should probably get her home and into her own bed. Familiar surroundings are better for recovery, and she needs to be ready for school tomorrow if she... I sat in my dark living room for 3 hours after they left, my cheek still burning from Marcus's hand, my heart shattered into pieces I wasn't sure could ever be reassembled. The silence felt different now, not peaceful, but hollow, like the echo you hear in an empty house after the last piece of furniture has been moved out. Emma's blanket was still on the couch, and I pulled it to my chest, breathing in the faint scent of her strawberry shampoo mixed with the lavender fabric softener I'd always used. How had I failed so completely? How had I raised a son who could strike his own mother to protect a woman who was systematically destroying his family? But even in my pain, I knew the answer. Marcus hadn't become a different person overnight. He'd been gradually reshaped, his moral compass spun so many times that he no longer knew which direction pointed toward right. Kara hadn't just isolated him from his family. She'd isolated him from himself, from the values Robert and I had tried to instill, from his own instincts about what was good and decent and true. The realization brought a strange kind of clarity. This wasn't about my hurt feelings or wounded pride. This was about a predator who had infiltrated my family and was systematically destroying it from within. Emma was suffering. Marcus was losing himself. and I was the only one who seemed to see what was happening. Tanya's words echoed in my mind. You watch, you listen, and you wait for her to show her true colors, because she will, Eleanor. People like that always do. Kara had shown her true colors tonight, and she'd manipulated my son into violence to protect her facade. But what could I do? Who would believe a hurt mother's accusations against a charming young woman who'd never directly threatened anyone? What proof did I have beyond gut instincts and a growing pile of small cruelties? I thought about calling the police, but what would I tell them? That my son's girlfriend was emotionally manipulative? That she was isolating him from his family? That she'd goaded him into slapping me during an argument? Marcus would deny it. Kara would play the victim, probably claim I'd attacked her verbally and Marcus had simply been protecting his fiancée from his unstable mother. I thought about calling a lawyer, but again, what case did I have? Kara hadn't committed any obvious crimes. She hadn't stolen money or forged documents or made specific threats. She was just evil. And evil wrapped in charm and fake concern was remarkably difficult to prosecute. That's when I remembered the dusty box in my bedroom closet. The one I hadn't opened since Robert's funeral. It contained cards and letters from his colleagues, programs from retirement parties, and contact information for people who'd been part of our lives during his 30 years as a high school guidance counselor. Robert had believed in helping people navigate difficult situations, and he'd kept in touch with families long after their children had graduated. One of those families was the Monroes. Their daughter Sarah had been a troubled kid, acting out, skipping school, running with the wrong crowd. Robert had spent countless hours with her, helping her find direction and purpose. By the time she graduated, she'd turned her life around completely. Her father, Judge Thaddeus Monroe, had credited Robert with saving his daughter's future. Judge Monroe had retired from the federal bench 5 years ago, but I remembered him as a man of integrity and intelligence, someone who understood how to uncover truth in complex situations. More importantly, he owed Robert a debt of gratitude that might make him willing to listen to a desperate mother's concerns. I found his contact information on a Christmas card from 2019, his elegant handwriting still clear despite the passage of time. It was past 10 o'clock, far too late for a social call, but this wasn't about social niceties anymore. This was about survival. My hands shook as I dialed the number, and I almost hung up when I heard his deep, measured voice answer, on the third ring. Judge Monroe? This is Eleanor Lewis. I don't know if you remember me, but my husband, Robert— Eleanor, he interrupted, and I could hear the warmth in his voice. Of course I remember you. How are you, my dear? I was so sorry to hear about Robert's passing. He was a remarkable man who made a real difference in young people's lives. Thank you, I managed, my throat tight with emotion. Judge Monroe, I'm calling because I need help, and I didn't know where else to turn. I think my son is in an abusive relationship, and I'm afraid for him and my granddaughter. There was a pause, and when he spoke again, his voice had shifted into the careful, professional tone I imagined he'd used in courtrooms for decades. Tell me what's happening, Eleanor. Take your time. So I did. I told him about Kara's gradual isolation tactics, her manipulation of Marcus's finances and parenting decisions, the way Emma had changed from a confident child into an anxious shadow of herself. I told him about the slap, about the way Kara had orchestrated the entire confrontation to position herself as the victim and me as the threatening outsider. What's the girlfriend's full name? He asked when I finished. Kara Williams. At least that's what she told us. Age? She says she's 32. Where does she claim to be from? Atlanta originally, but she's been vague about specifics. She works in hotel marketing downtown, though I've never been entirely clear on the details of her job. Judge Monroe was quiet for a long moment, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. Eleanor, he said finally, I want you to listen to me very carefully. What you're describing sounds like a pattern I've seen before in my courtroom. Financial manipulation, isolation from family, emotional abuse disguised as concern. These are classic tactics used by what we call romantic predators. Romantic predators. People who target vulnerable individuals for financial or emotional exploitation. They're often charming, intelligent, and very good at identifying people who are lonely or have recently experienced trauma, like your son's divorce. My blood ran cold. You think Kara is a what? A con artist? I think she's someone who bears investigating, he said carefully. Eleanor, I'm going to ask you some questions, and I need you to answer as specifically as possible. Has she shown unusual interest in your son's financial situation? Has she encouraged him to make changes to his will, his insurance beneficiaries, or his property ownership? I thought back over the past months, pieces of conversations I'd overheard or details Marcus had mentioned in passing. She helped him reorganize his finances when they first got serious, I said slowly. Joint accounts, she called it, and she's been pushing him to sell his house and buy something bigger, something that would require both their incomes to afford. Has she expressed interest in your financial situation, your property, any inheritances or insurance policies? She's made comments about my house, I admitted. Suggestions that I should downsize, move into a retirement community. She's said Marcus worries about me living alone, though he's never expressed those concerns to me directly. And the timeline. How quickly did this relationship progress? Fast, I said. They've been together about 7 months, and they're already talking about marriage. She moved in with him after 3 months. Eleanor, I need to do some research, but I want you to promise me something. Don't confront your son or his girlfriend with these suspicions. Don't change your routine or give them any indication that you're looking into Kara's background. Can you do that? Yes, I said, though the idea of pretending normalcy after tonight felt impossible. Good. I'm going to make some calls tomorrow, run some checks. If Kara Williams is her real name and she's who she claims to be, we'll figure out how to address the emotional abuse situation. But Eleanor? Yes? If she's not who she claims to be, if this is a pattern of behavior, then your son and granddaughter are in more danger than you realize. These people don't just take money. They destroy lives, families, futures. And they're very good at making sure their victims defend them right up until the moment everything collapses. After I hung up, I sat in the dark for another hour, processing what Judge Monroe had told me. Part of me hoped I was wrong, hoped that Kara was just an emotionally damaged woman who loved Marcus poorly rather than a calculating predator who saw him as a mark. But deep down, I knew better. The pieces fit too perfectly, the pattern too clear. The next morning, I called in sick to my volunteer work at the Literacy Center, the first time I'd done so in 5 years. I couldn't bear the thought of making small talk about books and reading programs when my world was potentially crumbling around me. Instead, I went to see Darla James, the pastor's wife at our little Methodist church. Darla was in her 70s, a woman of quiet wisdom who'd counseled troubled families for decades. If anyone could help me navigate the spiritual and emotional minefield I was walking through, it would be her. I found her in the church garden, tending to the roses that would bloom in a few weeks. She looked up when she heard my footsteps on the gravel path, and her kind face immediately creased with concern. Eleanor? Child, you look like you haven't slept a wink. What's troubling you? I told her everything, from my first uncomfortable meeting with Kara to the slap that had brought me to this moment of reckoning. Darla listened without interruption, her weathered hands continuing to work among the rose bushes while I unburdened my heart. I keep thinking I should have seen it sooner, I finished. I should have protected Marcus and Emma from her. What kind of mother lets her child fall into something like this? Darla set down her pruning shears and fixed me with a steady gaze. Eleanor Lewis, you stop that right now. You didn't let anything happen. A predator targeted your family and you recognized the threat. That's not failure. That's wisdom. But Marcus struck me because of her, I said, my voice breaking. My own son hit me to defend a woman who's destroying his life. Your son is a victim, Eleanor. He's been systematically manipulated and isolated by someone who's very good at what she does. The fact that she pushed him to violence shows she's losing control of the situation, getting desperate. And desperate people make mistakes. Judge Monroe thinks she might be some kind of professional con artist. Then you listen to Judge Monroe, and you trust that God will provide the truth when it's needed most. Darla reached over and took my hands in her soil-stained ones. But Eleanor, I need you to hear something very important. Silence in the face of abuse isn't peace. It's surrender. You cannot love someone into being good if they've chosen to be evil. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is expose the darkness so the light can shine in. Those words followed me home and stayed with me through the longest day of my life. I jumped every time the phone rang, hoping it would be Judge Monroe with answers, or Marcus calling to apologize, or even Kara herself making some slip that would reveal her true nature. Instead, it was Tanya who called around dinner time, her voice tight with worry. Eleanor, I just saw Marcus and that girlfriend of his at the grocery store. She had her arm around him like he was an invalid, and he looked, I don't know how to describe it, broken. What happened? I told her about the confrontation, the slap, and my call to Judge Monroe. Tanya listened with growing anger, and when I finished, she was practically vibrating with fury. That manipulative little witch, she spat. She orchestrated the whole thing, didn't she? Got your son so worked up that he'd do something he'd never normally do. Something that would drive a wedge between you two that might never heal. It might work, I admitted. Marcus has never hit anyone in his life. He's probably so ashamed and confused that he'll do anything Kara suggests to make sense of what happened. Over my dead body, Tanya said fiercely. We're going to expose this woman for what she is, Eleanor. And when we do, your son is going to realize what a fool he's been. What if we can't prove anything? What if Judge Monroe's investigation doesn't turn up anything concrete? Then we'll find another way, Tanya said firmly. Evil might be clever, but it's not smarter than two angry grandmothers with nothing left to lose. That night, as I lay in my empty house listening to the spring rain against my windows, I thought about the woman my granddaughter was becoming under Kara's influence. Fearful, apologetic, diminished. I thought about my son, so lost in manipulation that he'd betrayed every value he'd been raised with. I thought about the life Robert and I had built together, the legacy we'd hoped to leave, all of it being systematically destroyed by a woman who saw my family as nothing more than resources to be harvested. But mostly, I thought about Darla's words. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is expose the darkness so the light can shine in. By morning, I had made my decision. Whatever Judge Monroe discovered, whatever evidence he could provide, I was going to fight for my family. I was going to trust that 40 years of loving Marcus and 8 years of cherishing Emma counted for more than 7 months of manipulation and lies. I was going to stop being a victim and start being a warrior. Judge Monroe called at exactly 9 o'clock the next morning, his voice crisp with the authority of someone accustomed to delivering consequential news. Eleanor, we need to meet. How quickly can you get to Tanya's house? The urgency in his tone sent adrenaline shooting through my system. 20 minutes. Why Tanya's house? Because I need to show you some documents that shouldn't be seen in a place where your son or his girlfriend might unexpectedly appear. And because we're going to need Mrs. Morales' help with what comes next. I threw on clothes with shaking hands, my mind racing through possibilities. Had he found criminal records? Evidence of other victims? Or was I about to learn that my suspicions were unfounded and I was just a paranoid mother who'd let her imagination run wild. Tanya was waiting on her front porch when I arrived, her expression grim. "He called me too," she said without preamble. "Said to brew strong coffee and clear my kitchen table. Eleanor, I've got a feeling we're about to learn some things we wish we didn't know." Judge Monroe arrived 5 minutes later, carrying a leather briefcase that looked like it had seen decades of courthouse battles. He was a distinguished man in his mid-70s, with silver hair and the kind of bearing that commanded respect even in casual clothes. But today, there was something deeply troubled in his eyes. "Ladies," he said, settling his briefcase on Tanya's kitchen table with deliberate care. "Before I show you what I found, I need to prepare you. This information is going to be difficult to process, especially for you, Eleanor. The woman you know as Kara Williams has left a trail of destruction that spans multiple states and nearly a decade." My coffee cup rattled against the saucer as I set it down with unsteady hands. "Tell me." Judge Monroe opened his briefcase and withdrew a thick manila folder. "Her real name is Kara Michelle Donovan. She's 34, not 32. She has no college degree, has never worked in hotel marketing, and was born in Detroit, not Atlanta." He spread out photocopied documents across Tanya's table like evidence in a trial. "She has aliases in at least 4 states: Kara Williams, Kara Stevens, Michelle Donovan, and Karen Walsh. Each identity corresponds to a different romantic relationship, a different victim." I stared at the papers, police reports, court filings, newspaper clippings, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Victim? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Let me start with Leo Richardson," Judge Monroe said, pulling out a photograph of a man in his 40s with kind eyes and graying temples. "Software engineer from Portland. Kara met him on a dating app 2 years ago, moved in with him after 6 weeks. Within 4 months, she'd convinced him to add her name to his mortgage, take out a second loan for renovations, and change his life insurance beneficiary to her." "What happened to him?" Tanya asked quietly. "He's bankrupt. When he finally tried to get her to leave, she claimed he'd been physically abusive and filed for a restraining order. His reputation was destroyed, his career derailed. By the time the court sorted out the truth, she'd disappeared with $40,000 from their joint accounts." I felt sick. "There are others? 3 that I could document thoroughly." Judge Monroe laid out more photographs, more stories of devastation. David Chen, a divorced father from Phoenix. She cleaned out his savings and convinced him to sign over custody of his children to his ex-wife temporarily, while they focused on their relationship. He hasn't seen his kids in over a year. "Dear God," I whispered. "Thomas Bradley, a widower from Nashville whose wife had died of cancer. Kara targeted him 6 months after the funeral, when he was still deep in grief. She convinced him to sell his late wife's jewelry to invest in a business opportunity that never existed. When his adult children tried to intervene, she had him file restraining orders against his own family." The pattern was becoming horrifyingly clear. Divorced men, widowers, single fathers, all of them vulnerable, all of them isolated from their support systems before the financial devastation began. "How did you find all this?" I asked. "Professional networks," Judge Monroe said grimly. "When you've spent 30 years on the federal bench, you develop contacts in law enforcement across the country. I sent Kara's photo and the details you gave me to some colleagues, and the responses started coming in within hours." He pulled out another document, this one more recent. "This is a sworn statement from Leo Richardson. When I contacted him yesterday and explained the situation, he broke down and cried. He said he'd been hoping someone would stop her before she destroyed another family." I read Leo's statement with growing horror. The manipulation tactics, the financial control, the isolation from family. It was like reading a playbook for everything Kara had been doing to Marcus. According to Leo, she always follows the same pattern, Judge Monroe continued. First, she establishes emotional dependency through love bombing and constant attention. Then she creates artificial crises that require financial solutions, emergency, car repairs, sudden job losses, family medical emergencies that never quite add up but require immediate cash. She hasn't done that with Marcus yet, I said, because she's still in the foundation building stage. She's focused on gaining access to his assets and isolating him from anyone who might question her motives. The financial devastation comes later, after marriage, when the legal entanglements are more complex. Tanya was studying the police reports with a nurse's attention to detail. Judge, these other men, did any of them become violent? Did she push them to hit family members who questioned her? Not that I could document, but Leo mentioned that she had a talent for creating explosive confrontations that left her victims feeling ashamed and confused. She'd manufacture situations where good men would act in ways that went against their fundamental nature, then use their guilt and confusion to deepen her control. The truth hit me like a physical blow. She planned it, I said quietly. The whole confrontation with Emma, the way she twisted my words, the way she positioned herself as the victim while making Marcus feel like he had to choose. She wanted him to hit me. It's a classic technique, Judge Monroe confirmed. Create a moment of moral failure, then become the only source of forgiveness and understanding. Your son is probably more dependent on her now than ever, because she's the only person who doesn't judge him for what he did. Except he should be judged, I said bitterly. He should be ashamed. He struck his own mother to defend a woman who's planning to destroy his life. Eleanor, Judge Monroe said gently, your son is a victim. The shame and confusion he's feeling right now are weapons she's using against him. The more isolated and guilty he feels, the more he'll depend on her for emotional stability. I looked at the photographs spread across the table, men who'd lost their children, their homes, their life savings to this predator. How do we stop her? Carefully, Judge Monroe said. Kara is very good at what she does, and she's had practice dealing with family members who try to interfere. If we approach this wrong, she'll disappear and resurface somewhere else with a new identity and a new victim. What do you suggest? We need to document everything she's doing now. Build a case that connects her current behavior to her established pattern. More importantly, we need to create a situation where she reveals her true intentions in a way that Marcus can't deny or rationalize away. Tanya leaned forward. What kind of situation? Judge Monroe smiled for the first time since he'd arrived. We're going to give her what she wants most, access to money. But we're going to control the circumstances in a way that exposes her motivations clearly. He pulled out a fresh legal pad and began sketching out a plan. Eleanor, you're going to let it slip that you've been hiding significant assets from your family, a life insurance payout from Robert's death that you invested privately, money that Marcus doesn't know about. But there's no such money, I protested. Kara doesn't know that. What she'll know is that you have access to funds that could solve all the financial emergencies she's planning to manufacture. She won't be able to resist making a play for that money. How? She'll start by trying to convince Marcus that you're being secretive and dishonest, hiding money that should be part of his inheritance. When that doesn't work quickly enough, she'll approach you directly with some crisis that requires immediate financial help, probably a medical emergency or legal problem that can't wait for normal procedures. I thought about the woman who'd manipulated my son into violence, who'd turned my granddaughter into an anxious shadow of herself. And when she does, we'll be ready with cameras, recording equipment, and witnesses. We'll document her attempting to defraud you, and we'll use that evidence to show Marcus exactly who he's been defending. Tanya was nodding slowly. It's risky. If it goes wrong, she could disappear, and we'd never be able to protect the next family. Which is why we're also going to contact law enforcement in the other jurisdictions where she's operated, Judge, Monroe said. Leo Richardson is willing to testify about his experience. If we can connect her current activities to her past crimes, we might be able to build a federal case for fraud and identity theft. I stared at the papers scattered across the table, the faces of the men she'd destroyed, the legal documents that chronicled years of devastation. Somewhere in those files was my son's future if we failed, Emma's childhood if we didn't act. How long do we have? I asked. Based on her established pattern, not long. She's been with Marcus for 7 months, which is usually when she starts manufacturing the crises that lead to financial demands. Leo said she became engaged to him at the 8-month mark, then immediately started pressuring him to make financial changes for their future together. Marcus mentioned something about marriage, I said, my heart sinking. He said they'd been talking about it. Then we need to move fast, Judge Monroe said grimly. Once she has legal rights as his spouse, extracting her from his life becomes exponentially more difficult. We spent the next 2 hours planning our strategy, working out details and contingencies. Judge Monroe would contact his law enforcement colleagues and begin building the broader case. Tanya would help me plant the story about the hidden money, in places where Kara was likely to hear it. I would play the role of the wealthy widow trying to keep her assets secret from her grasping family. It felt like we were planning a military operation, which in many ways, we were. We were going to war against a predator who'd already claimed multiple victims and was now threatening the people I loved most in the world. As Judge Monroe packed up his briefcase, he paused and looked at me seriously. Eleanor, I want you to understand what we're dealing with. Kara Donovan is not just a gold digger or a woman with poor relationship skills. She's a professional predator who's spent years perfecting her techniques. She's destroyed families, driven good men to bankruptcy and despair, separated children from their fathers. I understand. I'm not sure you do. This woman has no conscience, no empathy, no genuine human connection to your son or granddaughter. To her, they're resources to be harvested. If she feels threatened, if she thinks her position is in jeopardy, she won't hesitate to escalate, in ways that could put them in real danger. The weight of his words settled over me like a shroud. What kind of danger? False accusations of abuse, manufactured medical emergencies, financial sabotage that could destroy Marcus's credit and career? In extreme cases, some of these predators have been known to harm children to maintain their hold over their victims. I thought about Emma's fearful eyes, her constant anxiety around Kara. You think she might hurt Emma? I think she'll do whatever it takes to maintain control of the situation, which is why we need to be very careful about how we proceed, and why we need to have law enforcement ready to intervene when the time comes. After he left, Tanya and I sat in her kitchen in stunned silence, the magnitude of what we'd learned, settling over us like fog. Eleanor, Tanya said finally, are you sure you want to go through with this? It's not too late to just call the police now, show them what Judge Monroe found, and let them handle it. I thought about Marcus, probably at home right now being comforted by the woman who'd orchestrated his moment of greatest shame. I thought about Emma, learning to walk on eggshells in her own father's house. I thought about the other victims, whose photographs were still burned into my memory. She's already won too many battles, I said firmly. It's time someone fought back. The hardest part about setting a trap for a predator is remembering that you're dealing with someone who's spent years perfecting the art of deception. Every casual comment, every seemingly innocent conversation, every piece of bait you dangle has to appear natural while serving a larger strategic purpose. One false note, one detail that doesn't ring true, and the entire operation collapses. I started small, planting seeds of the fictional inheritance story in carefully chosen conversations. At the grocery store, I mentioned to Margaret Walsh, the biggest gossip in Millbrook, that I was having trouble deciding what to do with Robert's life insurance money, now that the investment had matured. You know how it is, I said, loading canned goods into my cart with studied casualness. He made me promise to keep it separate from our regular accounts, said it was for Emma's college fund and my security. But now it's grown into more than I ever expected, and I'm not sure Marcus needs to know the details. You know how children can get about money. Margaret's eyes lit up with the peculiar joy that gossips feel when handed a particularly juicy piece of information. Oh, Eleanor, that's wonderful that Robert planned so well for your future. But you're right to be careful about who you tell. Money does strange things to families sometimes. By the end of the week, 3 different people had casually mentioned to me that they'd heard I was very well taken care of after Robert's death. The story was spreading exactly as we'd hoped. Judge Monroe had established the fictional paper Trail with impressive thoroughness. Using his connections in the financial world, he'd created bank statements showing a substantial investment account in my name, enough money to be tempting, but not so much as to be unbelievable for a widow, whose husband had carried good life insurance. The beauty of this approach, he explained during one of our secret meetings at Tanya's house, is that we're not technically lying to anyone except Kara. Your friends and neighbors are simply spreading information about a private financial matter that's none of their business anyway. Tanya had been monitoring Kara's behavior patterns, noting when she shopped, where she went for coffee, which social events she attended with Marcus. It was remarkable how predictable the woman was. Once you started paying attention, every Tuesday and Friday, she had coffee at Bean There Cafe on Main Street, always sitting at the same corner table where she could observe the entire room while appearing to work on her laptop. She's gathering intelligence, Judge Monroe observed, when we shared this detail. Classic predator behavior. She's monitoring the local social network, tracking gossip and information that might affect her position with Marcus. On a Thursday morning, Tanya and I executed the first phase of our plan. We arranged to have coffee at Bean There at the same time as Kara, sitting close enough for her to overhear our conversation but far enough away to appear casual. I still think you should tell Marcus about the money, Tanya said, her voice pitched perfectly to Carrie without seeming intentional. He's your son, Eleanor. He has a right to know about his father's planning. I know, I replied, stirring my coffee with nervous energy that wasn't entirely feigned. But Robert was so specific about keeping it separate. He said if anything happened to him, I should use the insurance money to secure my own future first, then worry about inheritance issues later. How much are we talking about? Tanya asked, playing her role perfectly. Enough to matter, I said carefully. Enough that I could help Emma with college, or assist Marcus if he ran into financial trouble. But Robert always worried that windfall. Money could change how people relate to each other in a family. From the corner of my eye, I could see Kara's laptop screen hadn't changed in 5 minutes. She was listening to every word. Well, you're certainly living modestly enough, Tanya continued. No one would guess you're sitting on that kind of security. That's the point, I said. Robert wanted me to have options without creating expectations or resentment. I'm comfortable in my house with my routine. Why complicate things unnecessarily? We finished our coffee and left, both of us feeling the weight of Kara's attention like a physical thing. The bait was in the water. Now we had to wait and see if she would bite. The response came faster than even Judge Monroe had predicted. That very evening, Marcus called, the first time he'd initiated contact since the night he'd slapped me. Mom? His voice was strained, uncertain. Could we talk? I mean, could I come over? There are some things Kara and I have been discussing, and I think we need to clear the air. My heart raced, but I kept my voice steady. Of course, honey. You're always welcome here. He arrived an hour later, alone but clearly agitated. He sat on my living room sofa, the same sofa where Emma had felt safe just days earlier, and fidgeted with his car keys like a nervous teenager. Mom, I need to apologize for the other night, he began, the words sounding rehearsed. I was way out of line, and there's no excuse for putting my hands on you. Kara and I have been talking about it, and she helped me understand how my behavior was unacceptable. The fact that his apology came through Kara's interpretation rather than his own conscience was almost more painful than the original slap. My son had become so dependent on her emotional guidance that he couldn't even experience genuine remorse without her permission. I appreciate the apology, Marcus, I said carefully. I know you're not the kind of man who would normally react that way. That's just it, he said, leaning forward earnestly. Kara helped me see that I was under a lot of stress that night, partly because I've been worried about our family's financial situation, about your financial situation, specifically. Here it comes, I thought. The opening move in whatever game Kara had coached him to play. My financial situation? I asked innocently. Mom, I know Dad carried good life insurance, and I know you've been living very modestly since he died. But Kara pointed out that you might be struggling more than you're letting on, trying to maintain your independence rather than asking for help. The manipulation was breathtaking in its audacity. Kara had taken our fictional story about hidden money and twisted it into a narrative where I was the one keeping financial secrets, potentially deceiving my family about my need for assistance. I'm doing fine, Marcus, I said gently. Your father planned well for my future. But how well? The question came out more sharply than he'd probably intended. Mom, I'm your only family besides Emma. If you're having financial problems, I need to know about it. We need to plan together, make sure you're properly cared for. Are you asking because you're concerned about my welfare, or because someone suggested you should be concerned about my welfare? Marcus's face flushed. That's not fair. Kara loves you, Mom. She's the one who pointed out that you might be too proud to ask for help if you needed it. And what kind of help does Kara think I might need? Well, for starters, this house is getting too big for you to maintain alone. The upkeep costs, the property taxes, the utilities, it all adds up. Kara found some really nice retirement. Communities that offer assisted living options with built-in social activities and healthcare support. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. Assisted living? Marcus, I'm 65 years old and in perfect health. Why would I need assisted living? Not now, but eventually. And these places have waiting lists, Mom. If we don't plan ahead, you might not have good options when the time comes. When what time comes? When you and Kara decide I'm too old to live independently. Mom, please don't make this adversarial. We're trying to have a practical conversation about planning for your future. Kara's done research on the costs of aging in place versus community care, and the numbers are pretty clear. Kara's research, Kara's suggestions, Kara's numbers. My son had stopped thinking for himself so completely that he couldn't discuss his own mother's future without referencing his girlfriend's opinions. I let Marcus finish his rehearsed speech about retirement communities and financial planning, nodding at appropriate intervals while my mind raced ahead to the confrontation I knew was coming. Kara wouldn't be satisfied with secondhand reports of this conversation. She'd want to assess my responses herself, to gauge how successfully she'd planted seeds of doubt about my financial independence and mental capacity. She came to my door 3 days later, arriving with a plate of store-bought cookies arranged on one of her expensive serving dishes, and that practiced smile that no longer fooled me for a second. Eleanor, I hope you don't mind me stopping by. Unannounced, she said, though we both knew the visit was anything but spontaneous. I brought some cookies and thought we could have a nice chat. I invited her in, offered coffee, and played the role of the gracious hostess while the recording equipment Judge Monroe had helped me install captured every word, every inflection, every mask-slipping moment that was surely coming. The beauty of this approach, he explained during one of our secret meetings at Tanya's house, is that we're not technically lying to anyone except Kara. Your friends and neighbors are simply spreading information about a private financial matter that's none of their business anyway. Tanya had been monitoring Kara's behavior patterns, noting when she shopped, where she went for coffee, which social events she attended with Marcus. It was remarkable how predictable the woman was. Once you started paying attention, every Tuesday and Friday, she had coffee at Bean There Cafe on Main Street, always sitting at the same corner table where she could observe the entire room while appearing to work on her laptop. "She's gathering intelligence," Judge Monroe observed, when we shared this detail. "Classic predator behavior. She's monitoring the local social network, tracking gossip and information that might affect her position with Marcus." On a Thursday morning, Tanya and I executed the first phase of our plan. We arranged to have coffee at Bean There at the same time as Kara, sitting close enough for her to overhear our conversation but far enough away to appear casual. "I still think you should tell Marcus about the money," Tanya said, her voice pitched perfectly to Carrie without seeming intentional. "He's your son, Eleanor. He has a right to know about his father's planning." "I know," I replied, stirring my coffee with nervous energy that wasn't entirely feigned. "But Robert was so specific about keeping it separate. He said if anything happened to him, I should use the insurance money to secure my own future first, then worry about inheritance issues later." "How much are we talking about?" Tanya asked, playing her role perfectly. "Enough to matter," I said carefully. "Enough that I could help Emma with college, or assist Marcus if he ran into financial trouble. But Robert always worried that windfall. Money could change how people relate to each other in a family." From the corner of my eye, I could see Kara's laptop screen hadn't changed in 5 minutes. She was listening to every word. "Well, you're certainly living modestly enough," Tanya continued. "No one would guess you're sitting on that kind of security." "That's the point," I said. "Robert wanted me to have options without creating expectations or resentment. I'm comfortable in my house with my routine. Why complicate things unnecessarily?" We finished our coffee and left, both of us feeling the weight of Kara's attention like a physical thing. The bait was in the water. Now we had to wait and see if she would bite. The response came faster than even Judge Monroe had predicted. That very evening, Marcus called, the first time he'd initiated contact since the night he'd slapped me. "Mom?" His voice was strained, uncertain. "Could we talk? I mean, could I come over? There are some things Kara and I have been discussing, and I think we need to clear the air." My heart raced, but I kept my voice steady. "Of course, honey. You're always welcome here." He arrived an hour later, alone but clearly agitated. He sat on my living room sofa, the same sofa where Emma had felt safe just days earlier, and fidgeted with his car keys like a nervous teenager. "Mom, I need to apologize for the other night," he began, the words sounding rehearsed. "I was way out of line, and there's no excuse for putting my hands on you. Kara and I have been talking about it, and she helped me understand how my behavior was unacceptable." The fact that his apology came through Kara's interpretation rather than his own conscience was almost more painful than the original slap. My son had become so dependent on her emotional guidance that he couldn't even experience genuine remorse without her permission. "I appreciate the apology, Marcus," I said carefully. "I know you're not the kind of man who would normally react that way." "That's just it," he said, leaning forward earnestly. "Kara helped me see that I was under a lot of stress that night, partly because I've been worried about our family's financial situation, about your financial situation, specifically." Here it comes, I thought. The opening move in whatever game Kara had coached him to play. "My financial situation?" I asked innocently. "Mom, I know Dad carried good life insurance, and I know you've been living very modestly since he died. But Kara pointed out that you might be struggling more than you're letting on, trying to maintain your independence rather than asking for help." The manipulation was breathtaking in its audacity. Kara had taken our fictional story about hidden money and twisted it into a narrative where I was the one keeping financial secrets, potentially deceiving my family about my need for assistance. "I'm doing fine, Marcus. I said gently. Your father planned well for my future. But how well? The question came out more sharply than he'd probably intended. Mom, I'm your only family besides Emma. If you're having financial problems, I need to know about it. We need to plan together, make sure you're properly cared for. Are you asking because you're concerned about my welfare, or because someone suggested you should be concerned about my welfare? Marcus's face flushed. That's not fair. Kara. Loves you, Mom. She's the one who pointed out that you might be too proud to ask for help if you needed it. And what kind of help does Kara think I might need? Well, for starters, this house is getting too big for you to maintain alone. The upkeep costs, the property taxes, the utilities, it all adds up. Kara found some really nice retirement. Communities that offer assisted living options with built-in social activities and healthcare support. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. Assisted living? Marcus, I'm 65 years old and in perfect health. Why would I need assisted living? Not now, but eventually. And these places have waiting lists, Mom. If we don't plan ahead, you might not have good options when the time comes. When what time comes? When you and Kara decide I'm too old to live independently. Mom, please don't make this adversarial. We're trying to have a practical conversation about planning for your future. Kara's done research on the costs of aging in place versus community care, and the numbers are pretty clear. Kara's research, Kara's suggestions, Kara's numbers. My son had stopped thinking for himself so completely that he couldn't discuss his own mother's future without referencing his girlfriend's opinions. I let Marcus finish his rehearsed speech about retirement communities and financial planning, nodding at appropriate intervals while my mind raced ahead to the confrontation I knew was coming. Kara wouldn't be satisfied with secondhand reports of this conversation. She'd want to assess my responses herself, to gauge how successfully she'd planted seeds of doubt about my financial independence and mental capacity. She came to my door 3 days later, arriving with a plate of store-bought cookies arranged on one of her expensive serving dishes, and that practiced smile that no longer fooled me for a second. Eleanor, I hope you don't mind me stopping by. Unannounced, she said, though we both knew the visit was anything but spontaneous. I brought some cookies and thought we could have a nice chat. I invited her in, offered coffee, and played the role of the gracious hostess while the recording equipment Judge Monroe had helped me install captured every word, every inflection, every mask-slipping moment that was surely coming. The beauty of this approach, he explained during one of our secret meetings at Tanya's house, is that we're not technically lying to anyone except Kara. Your friends and neighbors are simply spreading information about a private financial matter that's none of their business anyway. Tanya had been monitoring Kara's behavior patterns, noting when she shopped, where she went for coffee, which social events she attended with Marcus. It was remarkable how predictable the woman was. Once you started paying attention, every Tuesday and Friday, she had coffee at Bean There Cafe on Main Street, always sitting at the same corner table where she could observe the entire room while appearing to work on her laptop. She's gathering intelligence, Judge Monroe observed, when we shared this detail. Classic predator behavior. She's monitoring the local social network, tracking gossip and information that might affect her position with Marcus. On a Thursday morning, Tanya and I executed the first phase of our plan. We arranged to have coffee at Bean There at the same time as Kara, sitting close enough for her to overhear our conversation but far enough away to appear casual. I still think you should tell Marcus about the money, Tanya said, her voice pitched perfectly to Carrie without seeming intentional. He's your son, Eleanor. He has a right to know about his father's planning. I know, I replied, stirring my coffee with nervous energy that wasn't entirely feigned. But Robert was so specific about keeping it separate. He said if anything happened to him, I should use the insurance money to secure my own future first, then worry about inheritance issues later. How much are we talking about? Tanya asked, playing her role perfectly. Enough to matter, I said carefully. Enough that I could help Emma with college, or assist Marcus if he ran into financial trouble. But Robert always worried that windfall. Money could change how people relate to each other in a family. From the corner of my eye, I could see Kara's laptop screen hadn't changed in 5 minutes. She was listening to every word. "Well, you're certainly living modestly enough," Tanya continued. "No one would guess you're sitting on that kind of security." "That's the point," I said. Robert wanted me to have options without creating expectations or resentment. I'm comfortable in my house with my routine. Why complicate things unnecessarily? We finished our coffee and left, both of us feeling the weight of Kara's attention like a physical thing. The bait was in the water. Now we had to wait and see if she would bite. The response came faster than even Judge Monroe had predicted. That very evening, Marcus called, the first time he'd initiated contact since the night he'd slapped me. "Mom?" His voice was strained, uncertain. "Could we talk? I mean, could I come over? There are some things Kara and I have been discussing, and I think we need to clear the air." My heart raced, but I kept my voice steady. "Of course, honey. You're always welcome here." He arrived an hour later, alone but clearly agitated. He sat on my living room sofa, the same sofa where Emma had felt safe just days earlier, and fidgeted with his car keys like a nervous teenager. "Mom, I need to apologize for the other night," he began, the words sounding rehearsed. "I was way out of line, and there's no excuse for putting my hands on you. Kara and I have been talking about it, and she helped me understand how my behavior was unacceptable." The fact that his apology came through Kara's interpretation rather than his own conscience was almost more painful than the original slap. My son had become so dependent on her emotional guidance that he couldn't even experience genuine remorse without her permission. "I appreciate the apology, Marcus," I said carefully. "I know you're not the kind of man who would normally react that way." "That's just it," he said, leaning forward earnestly. Kara helped me see that I was under a lot of stress that night, partly because I've been worried about our family's financial situation, about your financial situation, specifically. Here it comes, I thought. The opening move in whatever game Kara had coached him to play. "My financial situation?" I asked innocently. "Mom, I know Dad carried good life insurance, and I know you've been living very modestly since he died. But Kara pointed out that you might be struggling more than you're letting on, trying to maintain your independence rather than asking for help." The manipulation was breathtaking in its audacity. Kara had taken our fictional story about hidden money and twisted it into a narrative where I was the one keeping financial secrets, potentially deceiving my family about my need for assistance. "I'm doing fine, Marcus," I said gently. "Your father planned well for my future." "But how well?" The question came out more sharply than he'd probably intended. "Mom, I'm your only family besides Emma. If you're having financial problems, I need to know about it. We need to plan together, make sure you're properly cared for." "Are you asking because you're concerned about my welfare, or because someone suggested you should be concerned about my welfare?" Marcus's face flushed. "That's not fair. Kara loves you, Mom. She's the one who pointed out that you might be too proud to ask for help if you needed it." "And what kind of help does Kara think I might need?" "Well, for starters, this house is getting too big for you to maintain alone. The upkeep costs, the property taxes, the utilities, it all adds up. Kara found some really nice retirement communities that offer assisted living options with built-in social activities and healthcare support." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. "Assisted living? Marcus, I'm 65 years old and in perfect health. Why would I need assisted living? Not now, but eventually. And these places have waiting lists, Mom. If we don't plan ahead, you might not have good options when the time comes." "When what time comes? When you and Kara decide I'm too old to live independently?" "Mom, please don't make this adversarial. We're trying to have a practical conversation about planning for your future. Kara's done research on the costs of aging in place versus community care, and the numbers are pretty clear. Kara's research, Kara's suggestions, Kara's numbers. My son had stopped thinking for himself so completely that he couldn't discuss his own mother's future without referencing his girlfriend's opinions. I let Marcus finish his rehearsed speech about retirement communities and financial planning, nodding at appropriate intervals while my mind raced ahead to the confrontation I knew was coming. Kara wouldn't be satisfied with secondhand reports of this conversation. She'd want to assess my responses herself, to gauge how successfully she'd planted seeds of doubt about my financial independence and mental capacity. She came to my door 3 days later, arriving with a plate of store-bought cookies arranged on one of her expensive serving dishes, and that practiced smile that no longer fooled me for a second. "Eleanor, I hope you don't mind me stopping by." "Unannounced," she said, though we both knew the visit was anything but spontaneous. "I brought some cookies and thought we could have a nice chat." I invited her in, offered coffee, and played the role of the gracious hostess while the recording equipment Judge Monroe had helped me install captured every word, every inflection, every mask-slipping moment that was surely coming. "I wanted to talk to you about Marcus," she began, settling into my living room with the proprietary air of someone who already considered my home part of her domain. "He's been so worried about you since our conversation the other night." "Has he?" I asked mildly. "Oh, yes. He feels terrible about not being more involved in your day-to-day life, not understanding your financial situation better. He loves you so much, Eleanor, and he's afraid you've been struggling alone rather than asking for help." The performance was flawless. Concerned daughter-in-law, loving fiancé, dutiful family member stepping in to address delicate issues. If I hadn't known what she really was, I might have been touched by her apparent care. "I've been managing just fine," I said. "Of course you have. You're such a strong, independent woman. But Marcus and I have been talking, and we think it might be time to start planning for the future more systematically. You know, making sure all your affairs are in order, exploring options for when you might need more support." "What kind of options?" Kara leaned forward with practiced empathy. "Well, for instance, have you considered what would happen if you had a medical emergency, if you fell and couldn't get to the phone or had a stroke and needed immediate care? Living alone at your age carries real risks. I'm 65, not 95. Of course, and you're wonderfully healthy, but accidents happen and isolation can be dangerous. That's why Marcus and I have been researching some lovely retirement communities, places where you'd have built-in social activities, healthcare, support, and the security of knowing help is always available." "And where would I get the money for such places?" This was the moment I'd been waiting for, the question that would force her to reveal how much she thought she knew about my fictional inheritance. Kara's eyes flickered with something that might have been excitement before she composed her expression into one of gentle concern. "Well, that's actually something we wanted to discuss with you. Marcus mentioned that Robert carried life insurance, and we're hoping you've been able to set aside some funds for exactly this kind of planning." "Some funds?" "Eleanor, I hope you don't think we're being nosy, but as people who love you, we need to understand your financial picture so we can help you make the best decisions. If Robert provided well for your future, that's wonderful. But if you're trying to preserve money for Emma's inheritance at the expense of your own care and security, that's not sustainable." The manipulation was stunning in its brazenness. She was simultaneously fishing for information about my assets while positioning herself as the reasonable voice advocating for my welfare against my own poor judgment. "I see," I said carefully. "And what role would you and Marcus play in helping me make these decisions?" "Well, Marcus is your only child. Naturally, he'd want to be involved in any major financial decisions that affect your future. And as his partner, I'd want to support both of you through the process." "Support how?" Kara's smile became a little strained around the edges. Eleanor, I work in marketing and financial planning. I understand investment strategies, insurance products, real estate values. I could help you and Marcus evaluate your options objectively without the emotional complications that sometimes cloud family decision-making. There it was, the offer to help manage my finances, disguised as family concern and professional expertise. I wondered how many other families had heard similar offers before their lives were systematically dismantled. That's very generous, I said. But I'm curious about something. You mentioned that Marcus was worried about my financial situation. What gave him the impression that I might be struggling? Oh, it's not that he thinks you're struggling exactly. It's more that he's realized how little he knows about your actual financial picture. He feels bad that he's never asked detailed questions about your security, your planning, your resources. And you encouraged him to start asking those questions? I encouraged him to be a more involved son, Kara said, her voice taking on a slightly defensive edge. Eleanor, I love Marcus, and I love Emma, and I'm learning to love you too. When people matter to me, I want to make sure they're protected and cared for. Is that really so wrong? Not at all. Though I am curious about something else. What's that? I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a photograph Judge Monroe had provided, Leo Richardson's driver's license photo from Oregon. Do you know this man? The change in Kara was instantaneous and dramatic. Her face went pale, then flushed red, then pale again. Her hands, which had been resting casually in her lap, clenched into fists. Where did you get that photo? She asked, her voice suddenly thin and strained. From a friend who's been helping me understand some things about people who target vulnerable families, I said calmly. Leo Richardson. Ring any bells? I don't know what you're talking about, she said. But she was already starting to stand up, her body language shifting from relaxed confidence to fight-or-flight alertness. How about David Chen? Thomas Bradley? Any of those names familiar? Kara was on her feet now, backing toward my front door. Eleanor, I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but… No game, I interrupted, my voice growing stronger as hers grew weaker. Just a conversation between two women who know exactly what the other one is. The only difference is that I'm fighting for my family while you're trying to destroy it. You're crazy, she spat, abandoning any pretense of sweetness. You're a bitter old woman who can't stand to see her son happy with someone else. And you're a predator who's made a career out of destroying good men and innocent children. But your career ends here, Kara. Or should I call you Michelle? Or Karen? The mask was completely gone now, and I could see the cold calculation in her eyes as she assessed her options. For a moment, I thought she might try to brazen it out, to convince me that I was mistaken or delusional. Instead, she chose attack. You want to know the truth? She said, her voice dripping with venom. Your precious son is weak. He's pathetic. He was so desperate for validation that he practically begged me to take control of his life. And Emma? That little brat needed someone to teach her some discipline. You've both spoiled Marcus so completely that he has no idea how to be a real man. Is that what you told the others? That they needed you to make them into real men? The others were just practice, she said with chilling honesty. Marcus is different. He's got potential, property, a good income, and he's got something else, a mother with hidden money who thinks she's smarter than she actually is. Hidden money? Please. You think I didn't notice how carefully you've been living? How you never spend money on anything significant, but somehow maintain this house, pay your bills, never seem worried about finances? I knew there was more somewhere. The only question was how much and how to get access to it. I felt a cold satisfaction at how completely she'd taken our bait. And how did you plan to get access? Marriage first, obviously. Then a few family crises that would require financial intervention. Maybe Emma would need expensive medical treatment. Maybe Marcus would have some business reversals that threatened his livelihood. Amazing how quickly people will liquidate hidden assets when their children's futures are at stake. You would hurt Emma to get to my money? I would. Do whatever it takes, she said simply. Eleanor, you made Marcus choose between us, and he chose me. You made him hit you to defend me. Do you really think there's anything he wouldn't do if I convinced him it was necessary for our family's survival? The recording equipment was capturing every word of this confession, but I found myself almost paralyzed by the casual evil of what she was describing. This woman had planned to manufacture crises that would endanger my granddaughter, to manipulate my son into betraying every value he'd been raised with, all for money that didn't even exist. You know what the best part is? She continued, apparently enjoying my horror. Even after you play whatever little recording you're probably making, even after you show Marcus whatever evidence you think you have, he'll still defend me. Because I'm the only person who's made him feel like a man instead of a disappointing son. We'll see about that. Yes, we will. But Eleanor, I want you to understand something very clearly. You can't win this fight. I'm younger, smarter, and I have something you don't have. Your son's complete emotional dependence. Even if you manage to plant some doubts, even if you make him question me temporarily, I'll just manufacture another crisis that brings him back to my side. Another crisis like what? Oh, I don't know. Maybe I'll have a miscarriage. Maybe I'll be attacked by a stalker ex-boyfriend. Maybe I'll discover a lump that could be cancer. Amazing how protective men become when they think you're vulnerable. The calculated cruelty of it took my breath away. She was describing the exact tactics that had probably worked on her previous victims, the manufactured tragedies that had driven good men to make terrible financial decisions in the name of love and protection. You're sick, I said quietly. I'm successful, she corrected. And after tonight, you're going to be very, very careful about how you proceed. Because if you try to sabotage my relationship with Marcus, if you try to turn him against me, I'll make sure Emma pays the price. What does that mean? It means accidents happen to children whose grandmothers don't know when to mind their own business. It means sometimes kids make allegations about inappropriate touching that follow them for the rest of their lives. It means Marcus might find himself fighting for custody against an ex-wife who's suddenly concerned about Emma's safety in a household where she's being exposed to instability and conflict. The threat was delivered with such casual viciousness that it took me a moment to fully process what she'd said. She was threatening to hurt Emma, to destroy my son's relationship with his daughter, to weaponize the very systems designed to protect children. You would accuse Marcus of abuse? I would do whatever it takes to protect what's mine, she said. And Eleanor, your son is mine now. His money is mine. His future is mine. You can accept that gracefully and maybe maintain some limited role in this family, or you can fight me and lose everything that matters to you. She moved toward the door, then turned back with one final twisted smile. Oh, and Eleanor, that recording you're making? I never technically threatened you with anything illegal. I just described some unfortunate possibilities that sometimes happen to families in conflict. Good luck convincing anyone that constitutes a crime. She left then, closing the door behind her with deliberate gentleness, as if she were still the sweet, concerned daughter-in-law she'd pretended to be when she arrived. I sat in my living room for a long time after she left, shaking not with fear but with rage. She'd revealed herself completely, the callous calculation, the willingness to hurt innocent people, the utter lack of human decency that drove her from one victim to the next. But most infuriatingly, she was probably right about the recording. She'd been careful not to make any explicit threats that could be prosecuted, instead couching her intentions in hypotheticals and possibilities. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd assumed that Marcus would never believe his mother over his girlfriend, that emotional manipulation was stronger than blood and history and love. She didn't understand that sometimes the truth has its own power, especially when it comes from people who've spent decades building trust rather than exploiting it. I called Judge Monroe and told him it was time to show Marcus exactly who he'd been defending. Judge Monroe arrived at my house the next morning carrying a briefcase that contained the evidence to destroy Kara's carefully constructed web of lies. But first, he wanted to hear the recording of her confession, to understand exactly what we were dealing with in terms of her threat level and psychological profile. We sat in my kitchen while her voice filled the room, sweet and concerned at first, then calculating and cold, finally revealing the predator beneath the mask. When we reached the part where she threatened Emma, Judge Monroe's jaw tightened with the controlled anger of a man who'd spent 30 years seeing justice perverted by people exactly like her. "She's more dangerous than I anticipated," he said, when the recording ended. The willingness to involve a child, to threaten false accusations, that level of calculation suggests someone who's moved beyond simple financial fraud into something much darker. "Can we use this recording?" Absolutely. While she was careful not to make explicit threats, the pattern of manipulation and the implied harm to Emma constitute enough evidence to support a restraining order. More importantly, this recording, combined with the evidence from her previous victims, should be enough to convince Marcus of who he's really dealing with. Should be, I repeated grimly. But what if it isn't? What if she's right about his emotional dependence on her? Judge Monroe was quiet for a moment, studying the legal documents spread across my kitchen table. "Eleanor, in my experience, people can rationalize almost anything when they're emotionally invested in a particular version of reality. But there comes a point where the evidence becomes so overwhelming, so undeniable, that even the most willful blindness cracks. And if Marcus isn't at that point yet, then we involve law enforcement immediately. I've been in contact with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, and they're very interested in building a case against Kara. With testimony from her previous victims and evidence of her current activities, we can protect Marcus and Emma even if he's not ready to protect himself." The plan was simple in concept, but terrifying in execution. I would call Marcus and ask him to come over to discuss some important family matters. Judge Monroe would be waiting with the evidence, and we would present Marcus with the complete truth about the woman he thought he loved. Ideally, he would see reason and ask Kara to leave his life immediately. If not, we would contact law enforcement and let them handle the situation while we fought for Emma's safety through the courts. I made the call at noon, my hand steady despite the magnitude of what was about to happen. "Marcus, could you come over this afternoon? There are some things we need to discuss about our family." "Mom, if this is about the other night, it's not about the other night, not directly, but it is important, and I'd prefer to have this conversation in person." He hesitated, and I could hear Kara's voice in the background, though I couldn't make out her words. "Could Kara come too?" he asked finally. "Whatever we need to discuss, she should be part of it." "Actually, I'd prefer to speak with you alone. First, this is about family history, some things about your father's planning that I haven't shared with you before." The mention of Robert and financial planning was enough to pique his interest and override whatever objections Kara might be raising. "I'll be there in an hour." Judge Monroe and I spent that hour preparing for every possible reaction Marcus might have. Denial was expected. Anger was likely. But we also had to be ready for the possibility that he might warn Kara, might give her time to disappear before law enforcement could act. "If he leaves here still defending her," Judge Monroe said, "we call the FBI immediately. I'd rather act without his cooperation than give her another day to escalate her threats against Emma." Marcus arrived precisely on time, looking tired and strained in a way that reminded me of the photos Judge Monroe had shown me of Kara's previous victims. The confident, successful man I'd raised was being systematically worn down by constant emotional manipulation, though he probably didn't recognize it yet. "Mom," he said, settling into the same living room chair where he'd apologized for hitting me just days earlier. "What did you want to discuss?" Instead of answering immediately, I led him to the kitchen where Judge Monroe was waiting. Marcus's surprise at seeing the retired judge was obvious, but he greeted him politely, probably assuming this was about some legal aspect of Robert's estate planning. "Marcus," I said, "I need you to sit down and listen to something very important. Judge Monroe has been helping me research some concerns I've had about Kara, and what we've found is going to be difficult to hear." "Research?" Marcus's voice immediately took on a defensive edge. "Mom, what are you talking about?" Judge Monroe opened his briefcase and pulled out the folder containing Leo Richardson's testimony and the police reports from Kara's previous relationships. "Marcus, the woman you know as Kara Williams is actually Kara Michelle Donovan. She has multiple aliases and a history of targeting vulnerable men for financial fraud." "That's ridiculous," Marcus said, but I could see uncertainty flickering in his eyes. "Kara's never asked me for money. She's got her own job, her own income." "Does she?" Judge Monroe asked gently. "Have you ever seen her pay stubs? Visited her workplace? Met any of her colleagues?" Marcus opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. For the first time, I saw him actually thinking about what he knew versus what he'd simply accepted on faith. "Let me show you some documentation," Judge Monroe continued, laying out the photographs and court records. "This is Leo Richardson from Portland. Kara lived with him for 8 months, gained access to his finances, and disappeared with $40,000. I watched my son study Leo's photo, then the police reports, then the sworn statement describing manipulation tactics that must have sounded uncomfortably familiar." "This could be about anyone," Marcus said weakly. "You've got some photos and some stranger's claims about a woman who might look like Kara. That's not proof." Judge Monroe pulled out his phone and showed Marcus a clear photograph of Kara taken outside our local grocery store just 2 days earlier. "This is the same woman, Marcus. Same facial structure, same distinguishing marks. We're not talking about someone who might look like your girlfriend. We're talking about your girlfriend operating under a false identity." "But why would she—" Marcus stopped, the question hanging in the air as the implications began to sink in. "Because that's what she does," I said gently. "She finds good men who are lonely or vulnerable, makes them feel special and loved, then systematically isolates them from their families while gaining access to their resources." "That's not what happened with us," Marcus protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "Kara fell in love with me. She moved here for a fresh start, not to con anyone." "Marcus," Judge Monroe said, "I need you to listen to something your mother recorded yesterday evening. We played the audio of Kara's visit." Watching Marcus's face change as her voice shifted from sweet concern to cold calculation. When we reached the part where she described her plans to manufacture crises involving Emma, he went completely white. "She was just angry," he said desperately. "People say things they don't mean when they're confronted and upset." "Do they?" I asked. "Marcus, listen to how she talks about you in that recording, about Emma, about our family. Does that sound like someone who loves you or someone who sees you as a resource to be exploited?" He listened to the recording again, and this time I could see the recognition dawning in his eyes. The horrible understanding that the woman he'd defended, the woman he'd struck his own mother to protect, was everything we'd tried to warn him about. "She threatened Emma," he said quietly. "Yes, she did. And based on her history with other families, those weren't empty threats." Marcus buried his face in his hands. "Oh God, what have I done? What have I let into our lives?" The dam broke then, and months of suppressed doubts and ignored instincts came pouring out. He told us about the financial changes Kara had suggested, the way she'd gradually isolated him from friends and family, the constant subtle criticism that had eroded his confidence in his own judgment. "She made me feel like I was finally doing everything right?" he said, his voice thick with shame. After the divorce, after feeling like I'd failed at marriage and was barely managing as a single father, she made me feel competent and successful and needed. That's what predators do, Judge Monroe said compassionately. They identify what their victims need most: validation, security, love, and they provide it while slowly taking control of their lives. I hit my own mother because of her, Marcus said, looking at me with eyes full of pain and regret. Mom, I am so sorry. I don't know how you can ever forgive me. Oh, we're not strangers, Kara said with that practiced smile. We're family, and Marcus and I just want to make sure you're protected and cared for. The financial advisor, actually an FBI agent named David Reeves, entered with a briefcase, full of fake documents and forms. He played his role perfectly, asking detailed questions about my assets, my insurance policies, and my plans for estate management. Mrs. Lewis, Agent Reeves said, your son mentioned that you have some significant assets that aren't reflected in your normal banking statements. Could you tell me more about those holdings? I pretended to hesitate, glancing nervously at Marcus and Kara. I'm not sure I should discuss those details. Robert always said to keep some things private. Mom, Marcus said gently, we're here to help. No one's going to take advantage of you. Kara leaned forward eagerly. Eleanor, family financial planning only works when everyone's honest about the complete picture. If you have assets that Robert set aside for your security, we need to know about them to plan properly. Well, I said reluctantly, there was a life insurance policy. Robert invested the payout, and it's grown quite a bit over the years. How much are we talking about? Kara asked, abandoning any pretense of discretion. I'm not sure I should. Mrs. Lewis, Agent Reeves interjected smoothly, without knowing the approximate value, I can't give you proper advice about tax implications and estate planning. I looked around the room as if making a difficult decision. About $400,000, maybe a little more with the recent market gains. Kara's eyes lit up with unmistakable greed, and I saw her exchange a meaningful glance with Marcus. The amount was large enough to be tempting, but not so large as to be unbelievable. Exactly what Judge Monroe had calculated would trigger her predatory instincts. That's wonderful that Robert planned so well, Kara said, her voice vibrating, with barely controlled excitement. But Eleanor, keeping that much money in a single investment account could be risky. What if the market crashes? What if you need access to liquid funds for medical expenses? I hadn't really thought about that, I admitted. Well, that's why we're here, Kara continued, warming to her theme. There are much better ways to structure those assets. For instance, if you moved the money into a joint account with Marcus, you'd have the security of knowing he could access funds immediately if you had a medical emergency. Joint account? I asked, feigning confusion. It's very common for aging parents to add their adult children to their accounts, Agent Reeves said, playing along perfectly. It can simplify financial management and ensure continuity of care. But would Marcus have access to all the money? I asked innocently. Well, yes, Kara said, but that's a good thing. It means if something happened to you, Emma's future would be secure. Marcus could use those funds for her education, her health care, whatever she needed. And what about day-to-day management of the account? Agent Reeves asked. Mrs. Lewis, at your age, you might find it helpful to have someone younger handling the investment decisions and paperwork. Oh, I could help with that, Kara volunteered immediately. I work in financial planning, and I'd be happy to manage the account details so Marcus doesn't have to worry about it. There it was, the exact same pattern Judge Monroe had identified in her previous relationships. First, she'd convince the victim to add her romantic partner to financial accounts. Then she'd position herself as the logical person to manage those accounts on a day-to-day basis. Finally, she'd manufacture crises that required immediate access to funds, gradually draining the accounts while maintaining plausible explanations for every transaction. That's very generous of you, dear, I said. But I'm not sure I'm ready to make such big changes all at once. Eleanor, Kara said, her voice taking on a slight edge. I understand that change is scary, but sometimes we have to think about what's best for everyone involved. Marcus works 60 hours a week trying to provide for his family. Wouldn't it be wonderful if he didn't have to worry about your financial management on top of everything else? I suppose, I said uncertainly. And think about Emma, Kara pressed on. The arrest happened so smoothly that Kara barely had time to process what was occurring. One moment she was pressuring me to sign financial documents that would give her access to money that didn't exist. And the next moment FBI agents were entering the conference room with badges and handcuffs. Kara Michelle Donovan, Agent Chen announced crisply. You're under arrest for wire fraud, identity theft, and making terroristic threats. You have the right to remain silent. I watched Kara's face cycle through confusion, rage, and finally, a cold calculation as she realized the magnitude of the trap she'd walked into. Her eyes found mine across the conference table, and for a moment, the mask slipped completely. The woman staring back at me was pure predator. No warmth, no humanity. Just the chilling emptiness of someone who saw other people as resources to be harvested. You think you've won, she said quietly as the agents secured the handcuffs. But this isn't over, Eleanor. I'll be out on bail in 24 hours, and then we'll see how smart you really are. Actually, Judge Monroe said, entering the room as she was being led away, bail has been denied. Given your flight risk and the federal charges across multiple jurisdictions, you'll be remaining in custody until trial. The look of shock on Kara's face was almost worth the months of manipulation and fear she'd put our family through. Almost. After she was gone, Marcus and I sat in the empty conference room, processing what had just happened. The woman who'd nearly destroyed our family was finally facing justice, but the damage she'd inflicted would take time to heal. I keep thinking about all the signs I ignored, Marcus said quietly. How did I become someone who would defend a stranger over my own mother? You became someone who was being systematically manipulated by a professional predator, I replied firmly. Marcus, you need to understand that what happened to you wasn't weakness or poor judgment. It was psychological warfare conducted by someone who's spent years perfecting her techniques. Agent Chen returned to update us on the charges and the investigation. We've identified at least 6 other victims across 4 states, with total financial losses exceeding $300,000. Your cooperation has been invaluable in building this case. What happens now? Marcus asked. She'll likely plea bargain to avoid a lengthy federal trial, which means she'll serve significant prison time. More importantly, her arrest will be covered by the media, which should help identify any additional victims who haven't come forward yet. The media coverage began that very evening. Local news stations picked up the story of a romantic predator being arrested in connection with a multi-state fraud investigation. By the next morning, the story had spread to regional networks, and Judge Monroe was fielding calls from victims' rights organizations wanting to use our case as an example of how families can protect themselves from similar predators. Would you be willing to speak publicly about your experience? He asked me during one of our debriefing sessions. Not immediately, but eventually, when you've had time to process everything that's happened. I thought about the other families who might be going through what we'd endured. The mothers who were watching their children being isolated and manipulated. The grandparents who were being systematically excluded from their grandchildren's lives. Yes, I said. If our story can help someone else recognize the warning signs before it's too late, then something good will have come from all of this. Emma returned from Florida 2 weeks later, flying back with her mother who wanted to see the situation for herself. The little girl who'd been anxious and withdrawn during Kara's reign of terror was slowly returning to her confident, joyful self. Grandma Eleanor, she said during our first family dinner since the arrest, Daddy told me that Kara won't be coming back. Is that really true? Yes, sweetheart. She won't be bothering our family anymore." "Good," Emma said with the matter-of-fact directness that only children possess. She made everything feel scary, even when she was being nice. I never knew if I was going to be in trouble for something. Sarah, Marcus's ex-wife, stayed for several days to help Emma readjust and to better understand what had happened. The crisis had actually improved their co-parenting relationship, forcing them to communicate more honestly than they had since their divorce. "I'm ashamed that I didn't see what was happening," Sarah admitted to me privately. "When Emma started becoming withdrawn during our phone calls, I assumed it was just adjustment issues from the new relationship. I should have asked more questions." "We all missed some of the signs," I replied. "Kara was very good at what she did. The important thing is that Emma is safe now." Marcus began seeing a therapist who specialized in helping victims of psychological manipulation. The sessions were difficult but necessary, helping him understand how his emotional vulnerabilities had been exploited and giving him tools to rebuild his confidence and judgment. "It's hard to accept that someone could fake love so convincingly," he told me after one particularly challenging session. "Everything I thought I knew about reading people, about trusting my instincts, feels unreliable now." "Your instincts aren't broken, Marcus. They were overwhelmed by someone who understood exactly how to bypass your natural defenses. The fact that you're willing to do the work to heal shows that the man I raised is still there." Tanya, who'd been my stalwart ally throughout the entire ordeal, helped me process my own complicated emotions about the experience. The victory felt hollow in some ways. We'd stopped Kara, but not before she'd inflicted lasting damage on our family dynamics. "Eleanor," Tanya said during one of our kitchen conversations, "you saved your family." That woman would have isolated Marcus completely, drained his resources, and probably destroyed his relationship with Emma permanently. Instead, you fought back and won. It doesn't feel like winning when I think about how close we came to losing everything. But you didn't lose everything. Marcus is getting help, Emma is healing, and you've got your family back. Plus, you've probably saved the next family from going through what you endured. The trial preparations took several months, during which we learned more details about Kara's criminal history. She'd started with smaller cons in her early 20s, gradually building up to the sophisticated romantic manipulation schemes that had brought her to our town. The FBI estimated that over her decade-long career, she'd stolen close to $1 million from her various victims. Leo Richardson flew in from Portland to testify, and meeting him in person was both heartbreaking and inspiring. The man, Kara, had left financially and emotionally devastated, had slowly rebuilt his life, though the scars from her manipulation were still visible. "She took my money, my home, and my faith in my own judgment," he told me during a quiet moment between legal proceedings. But seeing her finally face justice, knowing that she won't be able to hurt other families the way she hurt mine, that's worth more than anything she stole. The plea bargain came through in September. Kara would serve 8 years in federal prison on fraud and identity theft charges, with additional state charges pending in Oregon and Arizona. It wasn't enough time, in my opinion, but it was sufficient to keep her away from vulnerable families for the immediate future. As autumn arrived and the legal proceedings wound down, I found myself reflecting on how profoundly the experience had changed our family. Marcus was more present as a father, more communicative about his emotions, more willing to ask for help when he needed it. Emma was thriving in an environment free from constant criticism and impossible expectations, and I had discovered reserves of strength and determination I hadn't known I possessed. The invitation to speak at a victims' rights conference came in October. Judge Monroe thought it would be therapeutic for me to share our story with families who were dealing with similar situations, and he was right. Standing at that podium, looking out at an audience of people who'd survived various forms of manipulation and abuse, I felt a profound sense of purpose. "They call me a victim," I told the audience, echoing the words I'd written in my journal during the darkest days of our ordeal. I call myself the storm. The response was overwhelming. Afterward, dozens of people approached me with their own stories. Mothers who'd recognized similar patterns in their children's relationships, elderly parents who'd been isolated from their families by manipulative caregivers, adult children who'd watched predators target their aging parents. One woman in particular stayed with me. She was about Emma's age, now in her 20s, and she told me about the woman who'd isolated her father after her mother's death. "My dad died alone," she said, tears streaming down her face. "That woman convinced him that his children were only interested in his money, that we didn't really care about him. By the time we realized what was happening, she'd moved him across the country, and we lost all contact. He died thinking we'd abandoned him." Stories like hers reinforced my conviction that speaking out was the right choice. If sharing our experience could help even one family avoid the devastation we'd endured, then the pain had served a purpose. Christmas that year was subdued but genuinely joyful in a way it hadn't been for months. Emma helped me decorate the tree with ornaments that held decades of family memories. Marcus carved the turkey with steady hands, no longer looking over his shoulder for approval or criticism. Sarah joined us for dessert, and for the first time since their divorce, she and Marcus seemed comfortable in each other's presence. "Grandma, Eleanor," Emma said as we sat by the fireplace that evening, "will you tell me the story about Daddy when he was little and tried to catch Santa Claus?" I told her the story, the same one I'd told dozens of times over the years, about how her father had set elaborate traps for Santa and ended up catching his own father instead. But this time, the story felt different. It felt like a reclamation of our family narrative, a return to the traditions and connections that Kara had tried so hard to sever. As the evening wound down and everyone prepared to leave, Marcus pulled me aside. "Mom, I know I can never fully make up for what I put you through, but I want you to know that you saved us. All of us. Emma, me, probably families we'll never meet. You saw the danger when I was too blind to see it, and you fought for us when I was too confused to fight for myself." "That's what mothers do," I said simply. "We protect our children, even when they're grown up and think they don't need protecting anymore." Later that night, I sat on my front porch with a cup of tea, looking out at the quiet street where I'd lived for 40 years. The house was mine again, truly mine, no longer threatened by someone who saw it as an asset to be liquidated. The family I'd raised and nurtured was healing, growing stronger in the aftermath of their trial by fire. I thought about the journal I'd kept during the worst of the crisis, documenting every manipulation and cruelty for evidence that we'd ultimately needed. That journal was locked away now, its purpose served, but I'd started a new one. This one was different. Not a record of suffering, but a celebration of resilience, a testament to what's possible when people refuse to surrender to predators who would steal their love, their money, and their peace. On the first page, I'd written, "They thought they could break us. They were wrong. We are the storm, and storms don't break. They transform everything in their path." The woman who'd tried to destroy my family was behind bars, facing the consequences of years of calculated cruelty. My son was rebuilding his life with wisdom earned through hard experience. My granddaughter was free to be a child again, confident in the knowledge that she was loved unconditionally. And I was Eleanor Lewis. No longer just a widow, no longer just a victim, but a warrior who'd fought for her family and won. The matriarch who'd risen from the ashes of betrayal to protect what mattered most. The storm had passed, and we were still standing. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.